Welcome to the Edge of Greatness podcast. The path to greatness is never linear and requires patience and consistency. Join us on our journey as we peel back the layers of success, searching for that elusive core. Each week we will explore a different component of greatness, utilizing experts who have traveled some part of the path that we are all on. We aim to uncover insights into the areas of leadership, coaching, performance, overcoming failure, the power of habits, and so much more. We are all on the edge of greatness. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have a very special guest with us. Her name is Vera Jo Bustos. She is a former collegiate basketball player at Adams State University, where she is now actually in their Hall of Fame. Former professional basketball player overseas in Greece, which we will get into a little bit because I'm curious about that experience as well. Then coming back, you did some college coaching, right?
Right.
And then now a mental performance coach, an author of A Mindful Journey, and a speaker, to sum it all up. That's a lot of stuff going on, huh?
Yes, it's a lot of stuff.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We appreciate you having you on. I'm excited to kind of get into things with you here. So first thing I want to do is, so it hasn't even been a year since your book came out.
Right.
What does it feel like being introduced as and recognized as an author?
That's one of those things that started off, it was planted in me as a dream. It wasn't one of those things where I always dreamed about becoming an author. You know, when I first started with the Mindful Journey, and we'll get into, I'm sure, my experiences playing overseas in Greece, but A Mindful Journey is about my experience playing professional basketball. And I kept a blog while I was out there. And so initially what I wanted to do was just clean up my blog and just print an actual physical copy, like 3 or 4 copies, you know, one for myself and my parents and grandparents, you know, the ones who love everything that I do, kind of a thing.
Right.
And I sent it out to who now she's, I don't know, like a 12-time published author, but she was my AP English teacher in high school. And so I just sent it to her asking, hey, could you clean this up a little bit for me? And it was her, after reading the first draft of the manuscript, saying, at the point, I didn't even refer to it as a manuscript, but she said, Vera Jo, this is too good for you to keep to yourself. And so it wasn't until I heard those words and that light spoken into me that dream was then planted, and then saying, oh yeah, I could be an author. I should write a book. But up until that point, it had never even crossed my mind. So the reason why A Mindful Journey is here now is just because somebody actually spoke light into me and encouraged me to pursue this.
That's pretty awesome. That's an interesting story. I have not had a chance to read it yet, but it's on my list for this year. So I'm really excited to get my hands on it, because now that you've said that it's more of just a firsthand account of like your experience and what you were going through, I'm sure it gives some pretty good insight to emotionally how you were feeling, physically, and all those different things that you probably had to go through. Because when you went overseas, you were just what, 22?
Yeah, I was 22.
Okay.
I was a youngin'.
Yeah. So tell me what that was like, being away from home on your own, playing professionally, because obviously you're not just there having fun, you're there for a job. Right. How was that experience for you?
It was the best and craziest experience of my life. And if I were given the opportunity to do it again, I would 100% do it. And as I stated in the book too, the first night that I was there, I cried myself to sleep thinking, what the heck did I just get myself into? And you go, and it's Greek, right? The language itself. And I'm going and I'm driving down the street and I see all these Greek signs. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Greek alphabet, but it's kind of like symbols. That's what I perceived it the first time I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is alien writing. Like, that's not an alphabet, right? And so it's more like symbols. And at the very beginning, when I first got there, I couldn't make sense of anything. I was like, how am I supposed to figure out where I'm going if this is all Greek to me, as we would say it?
Yeah.
And so then not only that, but then you got the language barrier. And I was fortunate where a majority of my teammates and my coaches did speak English, but that was only when it was spoken to me. So when you're speaking directly to me, you're speaking English, but you have to imagine on the basketball court, everybody's speaking Greek. And then inherently, as I'm not sure if you play sports or
Yeah.
basketball. Yeah, I'm sure you've got your experiences, but just think whenever you're thinking in quickly, right? Whether it's in defensive transition or you're calling out a player, whatever, you're not thinking what language you're speaking. You're just speaking.
Right.
And so as a native English speaker, and for them as a native Greek speaker,
Mm-hmm.
they always speak Greek, I speak English. And that was a big divide between us. And then between that, even so, where there was a lot of frustration because coach wanted to try to include me as much as he could, where that would get my Greek speaking teammates frustrated. Like, why is he speaking English for one person who doesn't understand? And then when he would speak Greek, I had no idea what was going on. And so all these frustrations, and I didn't hold anything back in the book. And I thought it was important to not just kind of paint the rosy picture of, oh, playing professional basketball is great. And I wanted to share the nitty gritty, what actually went on, what I was feeling. And beyond that too, all of the negative things that I kind of experienced personally, all the doubts, all the self-limiting beliefs that I had. Am I good enough to play here? I don't belong here. Who am I kidding? Right? All of those kind of things I wanted to include in there because I believe that a lot of young athletes go through these same emotions and feelings. And when it's not taught that, hey, that's normal, we all go through these even as a professional athlete, here's how we get through it. And so I think it's important to teach those lessons to the younger generations as well.
No, I agree. I think a lot of times athletes in general are perceived as so thick-skinned and tough that they're not allowed to show the emotional weaknesses that happen because of insecurities or self-doubts or anything that may be going on. And in your case, I mean, yours is a language barrier, which makes it even more challenging because you're trying to compete at the same level as these people that aren't speaking the same language, and you're trying to do the right thing by the team. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm not in the right spot, am I? Because everyone's just yelling at me in the language I don't understand. So what's going on right now?
Right.
So do you feel like your experiences over there is what led you down the path of becoming a mental performance coach?
Absolutely. It definitely tied into that. And, my experiences with sports psychology started my freshman year of college. Okay. And so one of my assistant coaches at the time, she was only with me my freshman year of college. She recruited me to Adams State, but she was huge in sports psychology. And she actually went on to work at the Naval Academy, and she was working with mental performance with the cadets out there. But she's the one who intrigued me with little subtleties of visualization and all that kind of stuff. And I've always been the type where give me anything that's going to give me an edge in my game, anything that's going to give me a one up on my opponent, I'll do it. And so I was always big on diet and all that kind of stuff. And so the mindset and the mental training really caught my attention. And so I started to pay more attention to that. And from that, I actually studied sports psychology, and I got a degree in sports psychology as well. And so with that, playing college basketball, taking that step up from high school, obviously it's a step up. Mm-hmm. But taking the step from college to the professional ranks is definitely another step up. And that's when I was really tested with my mental game, because not only am I playing at another level, but I'm also living in a foreign country. I'm also amongst people who don't speak the language. We talked about that a little bit and everything else. And so it was just a little bit nerve-wracking to start with all of these things going on. So I would 100% say that my experiences playing overseas did make me mentally tougher to start, but it also shed a light on some experiences that I was able to go through to then understand where other people are, to meet them where they are, to then help them get through it.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer that the mental side of training your mind for sport, or even just anything that you're trying to pursue excellence in, being able to control your mind and being able to understand how to switch between failure and success and adversity and everything that comes in between of pursuing excellence is valuable. So this is very intriguing to me. But what would you say was one of the tougher things for you to mentally overcome, maybe in your early days? Let's go with that, because I'm not really sure exactly how long you were there. So I'm sure there were things all the time. But early on, what would you say one of your mental obstacles were that you really needed to dig and hone in on some of those skills?
Honestly, I think it was overcoming the loneliness, because you have to imagine, and too, there's a big time difference, right? So Greece, I'm mountain time, and my family is mountain time. And so that was 9 hours difference. So it's, when it's morning for me, there's just not a lot of time. There was usually only like a 3-4 hour gap where I was able to talk to my family. And then even with that, you have to remember back in 2012, our cell phones aren't what they are now, right? And it was a little bit different, and Wi-Fi wasn't what it is, and there's not all these plans and stuff. And so the only way that I was able to connect is when I had a Wi-Fi connection. And my Wi-Fi in the studio apartment that I lived in wasn't always the best. And so I would have to go out to a coffee shop or something to just log in just to speak to somebody back home. And then at the time, like I didn't FaceTime and all of that. I don't really remember. I just remember we used Skype. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a process to even speak and communicate with family back home. And then I just remember too, I got really close with, I call them my Greek family now, but prior to that, like I didn't really have anybody to communicate with. So I was starving for communication. I was just missed the aspect of just speaking to people. So that was really hard to start off. And then you'll read in the book too, if you get it, but I only won 2 games. We only won 2 games that entire season. Oh, wow. 1 game in the regular season and 1 game in the play-outs. Play-outs, not playoffs, because play-outs, so once you get to the Greek league, they have what they call basically like a Division 1 and a Division 2. So the top league, the D1 league, or I forget what they call it, but basically the top league, D1, that's the very, very top. And then the Division 2 league, it kind of makes sense with D1 and D2. Right. So the bottom 2 teams in the D1 and the top 2 teams in the D2, they have the play-outs and the play-ins. Okay. So if you're a bottom 2 team, you're playing for the chance to stay in the league. So if you finish at the bottom 2 and you lose the play-out game, you drop a division. If you win the top of the D2, if you win that, you go up a division. Okay. And so we were playing in the play-outs. Oh, geez. So the fact that I only won 2 games of my entire season out there, the absolute worst career of my entire existence, also played with my mental game as well.
Oh, I can only imagine if you're constantly used to winning and all of a sudden you're stuck in a situation where you're trying as hard as you can, obviously, but you just aren't finding ways to win. That's got to take a toll on you because, that's an interesting thing. Let's segue from that for a second, because a lot of my high school athletes, obviously, when they get recruited to go play college, they're used to winning because good high school athletes who end up getting a chance to play at college typically create pretty solid teams, right? You don't have many elite level athletes go on to play at college that are part of bad teams. That's just the benefit of having a really good player at a high school level. But when they get to college, they don't always get that same success. Have you had any opportunities, or what would you give as far as advice to a young player who's at college and all of a sudden they find themselves struggling with the win department and it's something that's new to them? They're not really good at bouncing back from losing and being in a failure state.
I would ask them a simple question, because from my experiences, this is something that I really spent a lot of time on. And I would just ask, are you perceiving your success due to your talent or because of your effort? Okay. Right? So if all you do is base your self-worth and your successes off the talents you currently possess, you aren't really leaving any room for growth. And so a common one that I'll use is like Venus and Serena, right? Everybody knows who Venus and Serena is. Right. And we all know them as masters of their craft. But even them at one point in their life probably lost, right? They started as beginners. And even at the very beginning, maybe they were just started great in their game. I don't really know their story. But at one point in time, they weren't the all-time best. At one point in time, they weren't who they are. And even now, if you see Venus, right, she's kind of still at the top, but hey, she's getting beat a little bit now. So how is she handling that? Right. And so you can see some of these other professionals, but I always go back to, again, are you always just going back to your talent or your effort? And so when your success is measured by your effort and the progress that effort has accumulated, then that becomes something you feel you can control, something you can choose to improve on. So it always comes back to our perceptions is what I like to teach, right? The choices that we can make, the decisions that we continue to make with our game moving on. By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery. And then mastery leads to confidence. Confidence then leads to trying new things then leads to mastering new things. So I would just teach where you have to be open to growth in numerous areas of your game. Okay, so this isn't working. Where else can I grow?
Okay, I like that.
If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, no, I no, absolutely. And I love the idea of it's a perception thing and where you focus your energy as far as what you're looking at. Because if you're only looking at your talent, your talent can only do so much. But if you're focused on the process of getting better and you're focused on putting yourself out there, because again, anybody who's grown through successes has failed along the way. You're going to have setbacks. That's how growth happens. I mean, that's the biggest thing about pursuing something at a high level. If you stretch your abilities, eventually you're going to have a misstep where you can then learn, right? And if you are constantly just focused on yourself, you're going to miss those opportunities.
Right. And that's where I think too, it's important, because if I say, oh, I'm only talented and I'm basketball, so that's where my mind goes, but I'm only talented as a shooter. Well, now I'm limiting myself in the way that I can play the game, because now I'm going to have that fixed mindset where I'm not going to attack the rim as much. Or I just think as a shooter, so I'm just catch and shoot versus creating for myself or creating for my teammates. Now I'm really limiting my game. Mm-hmm. And then also, if all I focus on is the talent that I currently have, now I'm not giving my mental game a chance to grow, because the way that I see success is all the physical talent that I currently possess. Whereas the mental game, I truly believe, is an accumulation of the experiences that we go through and the things that we fail at, that then kind of plants those seeds of resilience to then add to our mental game later on. Because we failed at that one thing years ago or months ago, whatever it is. Hey, that's the seeds of resilience that I'm going to pull from now. And now I'm going to succeed because of that. Because I've already been there, done that. I know how to overcome that specific scenario.
Yeah, I like that. Because they're all learning opportunities that you can then kind of draw on later when things get tough again.
100%.
What about I have a bunch of younger athletes that I work with. I work with a lot of high school, and then I actually coach a middle school team. I've noticed a lot that the younger game, this is a different kind of question, but it's one that I just watched Mike Gundy talk. And so it kind of spurred an idea that I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were. When parents in the stands yell at their kid to do certain things and consistently are in their ear, is there something you do or would say to help the kid kind of tune that out? Because obviously they care what the parent's saying, because they care about what their parents' like perception of them is. But how do we navigate that as youth coaches to help our athletes and our parents understand that them yelling at them and trying to coach them in a game isn't actually helping them, it's actually affecting them?
Yeah, and that's actually something that's very common, like you said, amongst, I think, every single, it doesn't matter what sport, right?
No.
Because they're always doing that.
Yeah.
And so that's actually doing more harm than good for these athletes. And so most of the time, what I actually kind of talk with coaches and stuff too, I have these individual conversations with the athletes, but I think a lot of it starts with the conversation that you have with the parents. Okay. And something that I would even ask the parents is, what are you looking for your child, your athlete, to get out of this season? What characteristics, what are you wanting for them to learn? And most of the time, the interesting thing about this is that most of the time the parents are saying about leadership skills, teamwork, right? All these traits that have nothing to do with the actual physical skill that they're performing on the court or the field. None of it, really, because it's all these intangible things that they're wanting for them to grow, right? So if I say, even reframe that question, 20 years from now, what characteristics are you hoping for your athlete to learn today that will help them in the future, that will help them in high school, right? And it's all these intangible things. And I say, I love that. So how can you help me drive those characteristics by allowing me to coach? Because here's the thing, if you're constantly shouting what you think is going on or what you think should happen, and that contradicts what I'm teaching, now what are you, what message are you relaying to your athlete?
Right.
And so that's the conversation I kind of have with parents, and some take it in stride and some fight you every bit along the way. But something else, and it's a story that I share. When I was a youth athlete, and I believe I was in 7th grade, and my dad used to be the coach. And my teammate at the time, she was one of my best friends, and she was just so distraught in the game. And she's just like, coach, coach is my dad, coach, just tell him to shut up already. And my dad is like, who? Tell who? And she's like, my parents. So it makes a big deal. And so one of the things that I choose to, and it's not only with youth athletes, but it goes all the way up to the professional athletes, I call it anchoring.
Okay.
And anchoring is something where you can literally zone everything else out to focus on that one thing in front of you. And so there's 5 levels that I teach in depth with all that kind of stuff, but it's literally the ability to even watching TV, right? So the TV is on in front of you, and
Mhm.
let's just say that there's all this commotion and chaos going on. Can you tune out that commotion? Can you tune out that chaos and focus and listen and hear what's going on in the TV in front of you? It's the same concept as the basketball game, right? There's going to be all this commotion going on. Your parents are going to be yelling at you, and that's a great time. Hey, if I can tune them out and only train myself to only hear my coach's voice, then how much is that going to make me better down the road when you have crazy fans yelling at you? Hey, the higher level you go, the more crazy fans you're going to deal with.
That's
and
true.
Not only that, but you're going to have potential opponents who are going to be talking trash in your ear. Are you going to allow that to get you, or are you going to be able to overcome it and tune that out?
So what's a tip that you would give somebody who wants to start to train that attribute of anchoring? Would it be like the TV thing, or is there another way that's maybe not going to get them in trouble with their parents when they're not listening to they're watching TV?
So anchoring, there's a couple of things that you can anchor to.
Okay.
And so for me, what I found most beneficial, this is what I used to do as an athlete before I even knew what the term even meant. But I tell everybody, just listen and feel for your heartbeat. And so if you just listen and feel for that, and if you were to actually do that for a couple of seconds, what happens is that your mind goes blank. So you actually quiet your mind. And so when you anchor to your heartbeat, that quiets the mind to then tune everything else out. And then you can redirect your focus to the places and things that you need to go to. And so the TV is another one. Can I quiet my mind and redirect my focus to what I want it to go to?
Mm-hmm.
So that's our heartbeat anchor. You could also have a visual anchor. You could also anchor to your breathing.
Okay. I like that. And what's funny is when you said to focus on my heartbeat, I actually tried to do that for a second, and I found my breathing slowed down. Like I felt like everything started to settle into a more relaxed state instead of an alert, like paying attention to everything that's happening around me. It felt like everything just kind of came in, and I got this sense of where I was and what I was doing more in the moment than I was prior to it. Cause I felt like I was kind of hearing things, and I'm at work right now. So I've got noises in the background that pop up every now and then. I hope you're not hearing all that, but it's kind of one of those things that like every now and then when I'm doing this, not in my basement, and I'm doing it somewhere that's loud and distracting, I find myself hearing all that other stuff. But the second I did that, I felt myself come to a calmer, steady state, which is kind of an interesting kind of side piece.
Called the quiet mind.
Yeah.
You just quieted your mind. And sometimes you have to be careful though with anchoring. And something else that sometimes some athletes struggle with is when you anchor to your heartbeat, sometimes you tend to hold your breath, which we don't want. And so what I teach first you have to get your body under control first, and then you quiet your mind. And so we do like a simple breathing technique first, quiet down your body, get your body under control, and then we quiet the mind. Because it's really hard to quiet your mind if your body's feeling like it's in a threat state.
Right.
So we have to calm the body down first and then quiet the mind.
Yeah, no, and I think my athletic background I kept breathing, so I didn't hold my breath. Good. But it's weird because I found myself when I played being able to like tune stuff out like that, but I never knew what it was called. I never knew how I did it, but I always found that like when things got louder, I got more focused, but I didn't ever understand the process behind it. So it's cool to hear the terminology and how it like can be implemented and taught and trained. Cause for me, like I played baseball in college. So my background's still like the athletic world, but it was a different sport. And I don't know how much you know about college baseball, but there's normally not a lot of fans. Right. So it's normally not very crazy. But my sophomore year, we went to play at Texas for the NCAA tournament. And all of a sudden there were 10,000 fans. And they were crazy baseball fanatic, loud fans. And it's the first time in my baseball career I'd ever played in front of that many people, but I found myself not hearing them. Like every time the ball was hit, people were like, it's so loud. And I was like, I don't hear anything. Is that weird? I don't know what's going on.
So in hindsight, and I'd love to pick your brain about this a little bit too. So in hindsight, and as you reflect on that, because I think sometimes hindsight can be a great teacher. If you were to then take your experience from that and teach a youth athlete, how would you replicate that same situation experience to then teach somebody else to tune out the noise?
See, that's going to be the difficult thing because I don't know like what I was doing, it would be hard to replicate it. I guess the only thing I could say is I was extremely focused on each individual moment instead of worrying about the external things. So after every pitch, I told myself next pitch. So I reset my mind to focus on the pitch that was coming next after each play was done. And I don't know if that was part of it or that's just how I played. I don't know. But it's interesting because when I first became a coach, I found it difficult because a lot of things that came naturally to me don't come naturally to all the kids that I train and work with. And so I had to learn how and why certain things happened for me and how to teach it. And so that's where it's so interesting to talk to people who have backgrounds in all these things, because there are so many things that I did naturally, which I couldn't tell you why or how. I didn't have anybody train me, but people say it and I'm like, well, I did that, but I couldn't tell you how or why or how to replicate it. And that's difficult. So,
yeah. So from what you said, it kind of sounds like you were playing in the zone.
Yeah.
Right. You're playing in the moment. And so you just described the zone, and the zone is the same thing where you tune everything out and you're able to focus on that one thing in front of you. And so anchoring is the technique that allows you to start to get into the zone.
Gotcha.
And so it's these small techniques that we can train our brain, train our mind to kind of quiet ourselves down to then be able to get into flow, to get into the zone. And like you said, hey, it came naturally to me. And anchoring was something I did as an athlete too. I never even knew what the term was. I just did it.
Yeah.
But it's hard because how do you teach that? Right. And so that's where my job, that's why I get hired. That's why I have a job, is to be able to teach stuff like that. Because like you said, dang, I don't know. And that's the hard part, is to be able to transition what we experienced to then teach into applicable teaching moments.
Yeah. I'm curious, and I'd be really curious if somebody ever did an advanced study into this, is how many of the kids who end up getting a chance to continue to play past high school are more naturally inclined to find flow and be in the zone than the kids who maybe are not quite the collegiate level type of player. Because for me, I found myself in that state a lot, even in high school and in college, where everything kind of faded away. And I was, as I look back on it now, in a state of flow. And it's interesting because even when I played intramural sports, I found myself getting to that state in a non high stakes situation, just playing basketball with my friends. I'd find myself all of a sudden I can't miss. I'm in the zone. It's over. And I would just be throwing up shots from everywhere and nothing would miss. I'm like, why couldn't I do this when I played just 2 years ago and on the school team, and it's interesting. I'm curious have you had any, time studying that type of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would just ask you the question. So as you're saying, you're in flow, in the zone with all of these experiences. So how would you rate your confidence? Was your confidence high as you were in the zone for each of these experiences?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
No doubt.
That's our first step, is we have to train our confidence. Because if I were to ask you, if I were to put you on stage to play the violin in front of 500 people, would you be able to get in flow? Would you be in the zone?
Oh, not a chance.
Because you don't have any confidence.
Right.
And so the first thing that we have to teach, and this is always the first thing that I teach, and this is my first curriculum, is called Mindset of Confidence. So once we understand and are able to tap into that confidence that we possess, only then will we be able to step into flow. Because with flow, there's a fine line. We can't be too bored with something. If something is too easy, we're not going to put that focus right? Our brain checks out. This is too easy. I'm going to spend my mental energy elsewhere. So we can't be bored. And on the other hand, if something is too hard for you, you're also going to check out, right? And this is what happens sometimes, like if somebody's explaining something that's over your head, you start to listen initially, and then it's too much and you just check out. You stop listening because it's too much, it's too hard. And so your brain checks out. And so you need to find that nice, easy path there where your brain stays focused. Again, it all comes back to the focus, the spotlight, I like to call it, right? Just think of that spotlight. Mm-hmm. And so when you're too bored, that spotlight tends to go all over the place. When something's too hard, that spotlight tends to go all over the place. It's hard for us. We have to find that happy medium where we bring that spotlight into the one thing that we're wanting to focus on. And that's where we have to figure out for each of us, right? We have to be confident so it's not too hard, but it also has to challenge us so it's not too easy.
I like that. Yeah, because I think maybe that's what it was for me. is when I stepped away from the high school team and I had played intramurals, there was never a doubt in my mind that I could hang with every single person who was on the court because athletically, I was good enough to play, and I knew I wasn't playing kids from other schools. So it was always people I knew. It was always to a level that would be difficult, but never outside of the realm of my abilities. And that's how I always felt playing baseball too. I was always very confident that no matter who we were facing, I might win, I might lose, but I will always be able to compete.
Right.
And so that's
and
probably.
So let me ask you this, Coach. And I know sometimes with these podcasts, I throw the questions back on you. I just love that.
No, that's great.
You come from a college background as well. And so from a competitive standpoint, if you have an athlete who's not as competitively inclined, or they don't have that fire, like, yeah, I'm going to beat you, do you believe that you can teach competitiveness?
I think it has to be reframed from being a competitive aspect against somebody and maybe turn it into an internal competition, because most people are going to be competitive at something, whether they're externally competitive against someone or internally competitive against themselves. I think if you do it the right way, you can create a growth opportunity for a person based on what they're going to compete against or who they're going to compete against. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's kind of how I go about doing it, is that not everybody's going to be the I'm going to beat you one-on-one type of person, but a lot of people, if you're playing a sport, you don't want to be bad at it. You want to get better. There's competitiveness in there, but it's got to be redirected toward a piece of competition that's going to help them grow versus put them against somebody who they may not want to compete with.
Yep. I love that. And sometimes too, this is the hard part with coaches, because most of the time when we think competitive, it's always the external, right? And that's how we tend to always challenge these kids. And sometimes if you have somebody who's more internally driven, I would argue that, well, I guess that was a little bit of both. But a lot of times too, if you're constantly putting me up against somebody else, sometimes these kids are going to fold rather than rise.
Right.
And so I think as a coach, it's hard for us sometimes to figure out that distinction. And a lot of old school coaches are kind of my way or the highway. And even some of the younger ones, right? It's my way or the highway. And I coach a specific way. And if you can't handle it, get out. But we also know too, that there's so many different personalities and internal versus external motivation and all that kind of stuff, right? It all plays a factor. And so if you think of the best coaches, you're able, like you just said, you're able to distinguish the difference between how I motivate, how I challenge a specific athlete. One athlete may thrive with you challenging him in front of the entire team, whereas doing that to somebody else is going to make him fold, and vice versa.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How do you figure that out?
I think that obviously comes down to just spending time to get to know who you're working with. I mean, that's the biggest thing. It always comes back to relationships when it comes to finding a way to motivate people to do or find their best, right? I mean, you have to know who you're communicating with, why they're doing what they're doing, what they're passionate about, and then know that, all right, Jimmy, John's doing it better than you today, so you better step up your game, versus, Jimmy, I've seen you do better than this. What's going on? And unlocking that drive.
I think it's important too to also understand what the end goals are for each of these kids, because at the end of the day, at coaching at the high school level, even the middle school level, not every athlete wants to be a professional athlete. Not every athlete wants to play in college. And that's okay, because we know that sport is a great platform to teach life lessons. And if we're trying to, and I think that's one of the horrible things that society is preaching to high school athletes, is like everybody's trying to get a college scholarship. Right. Which, no, like, what's the bigger picture here, right? We're trying to teach these characteristics, leadership skills, teamwork, all the things that we talked about before. And so if I'm pushing this college scholarship mindset on you, that's actually going to hinder more of our athletes than it is going to help. Or you have those 2% who know, and I was driven by that too. Right. But there's other teammates that I remember in high school, like, no, they had no ambition to play in college. Absolutely not. So if I challenge you then by talking about your leadership skills and how that's going to help you in the future, maybe become a CEO, now that's going to be more motivating to this kid versus the other kid.
Yeah. And do you feel like it also helps to kind of talk on the points of understanding how to compete? Like, because obviously everyone's got their different competitiveness, but the real world, when you get into a job, when you get into the real world, you're going to compete, whether you're playing a sport or not. Competition doesn't go away when sports stop. Like, there's always somebody vying for your position at work or vying for the job that you're applying for. And again, those aren't always external competitions, but internal ones to get better, to get stronger, to understand your profession and those types of things. So would you relate it back to that as well?
I think so. And I think too, I always do my best to create a safe space to fail, because we know we're talking about failure. That's the only way that we grow.
Right.
And sometimes I think, and I just go back to, you always see these coaches, right? A mistake is made and their body language is horrible. Throw their hands in the air like, oh my gosh, the world is ending.
Right.
So this isn't a safe place to fail. And if I know that, and then there's this culture too, where I make a mistake and boom, I'm out. So now, and this is the power of don't speak, I call it. So if you're constantly focusing on what not to do, you're going to be more inclined to do that. Like I'm pretty sure Kobe Bryant said, if you're afraid of failing, then you're probably going to fail.
True.
And it's so true. Because if I were to tell you right now, coach, don't think about an elephant. Don't think about an elephant with big long ears. Don't think about an elephant. You're already thinking about an elephant, because your brain only understands subject matter. So in order for you not to think about an elephant, you have to think about and get the picture of an elephant in your head first, and then tell yourself not to think about that thing. It's counterproductive, right? It doesn't really make sense. Right. And so sometimes too, as athletes, at the end of the game, crunch time, or maybe bottom of the ninth, right, where we sit at the plate, bases loaded, full count, and I'm standing there like, oh my gosh, don't strike out, don't strike out, don't strike out.
Right.
The brain doesn't understand the word don't. So if you cross out the word don't, you're telling yourself, strike out, strike out, strike out.
Right.
Right. And so we have to be careful about the way that we talk to ourselves as athletes, but also as coaches. Right.
Yeah.
Don't turn it over. Don't dribble into the corner. Don't let her shoot. So we're always telling them what we don't want to happen, but then we're also we're more inclined to have the athlete focus on that one thing. And so how can we change the language that we not only tell ourselves as athletes, but how can we change the language that we're then speaking into our athletes as well?
Yeah, that's been a big part of the shift in my coaching too, is away from the negative side of things and more towards the focus on these attributes, directional giving. Because when I first started coaching, obviously I would see a mistake and address a mistake. Don't do that. Let's do this. Right. Now it's more, what were your options there? Why do you feel this situation happened? And I do my best not to communicate immediately after a mistake, because I keep having these conversations with people about, failure and mistakes and things like that. And I can't remember a time in my life where I made a mistake and didn't know I made a mistake. Like, I know I messed up. You don't need to tell me you messed up. So piling it on only makes it me harder on myself and go, well, yeah, no, I know I made a mistake. Thanks for pointing it out, because it's already here. Now it's all over the place. And now you lost me.
Right.
So would you agree that it's beneficial, or how would you propose approaching mistakes and giving feedback? Because obviously we want to improve upon the mistakes that are being made without drawing necessary attention to the failure that just occurred.
Well, I think it's important, and something I call a mistake response routine.
Okay.
Because it's something that we're always going to make mistakes in life. And this is where I love sport, because again, it's a great teacher. And so just say, okay, you miss a pop-up, you miss a grounder, you strike out. What is your response going to be to that mistake, to that adversity, to that challenge? And let's figure that out before it happens. Because most of the time we allow our feelings to dictate our actions. And so what happens when you make a mistake? You allow those negative feelings to overcome you. And then that, with your actions, that is detrimental to then how you perform after the fact. And so if I take that and I'm now proactive with that, and I say, okay, when I strike out, and it's always a when, right? I mean, it's inevitable. In baseball, you're going to strike out. Right. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to have an error. In basketball, you're going to miss a shot. You're going to turn it over. It's inevitable. Even the best in the world still make mistakes. Right? Getting paid millions of dollars and they're still making mistakes.
Make a lot of mistakes.
So what is the response that you are going to have in that moment? 2 claps, next play. NBA, next best action. What are those things? And then we train that in our mind ahead of time. And this is something that I teach my athletes to also incorporate into their visualization. And so it's just a habit now. So I make a mistake, next play. And now again, that's changing the way that my brain works. We're talking about plasticity and everything is creating those neural highways that I make a mistake and it's no big deal, because I've already curated the response to it ahead of time.
I like that. And I like the idea of preparing for the mistake, because I'm reading a book right now. It's Science Behind Winning and Losing. It's called Top Dog. Have you ever heard of it?
Mm-mm.
Okay. It's very interesting, but they're talking about if you are just a positive thinker, that's actually not going to serve you well. You have to be a positive thinker with understanding of potential negative outcomes so your brain can overcome the adversity that's going to happen, and you have a plan in place to navigate the difficulties that are going to occur.
Right.
And that sounds a lot like what you were saying is, you know, it's okay to be positive, but you have to understand eventually you're going to mess up or something bad is going to happen. Even if it's outside your control, it's going to be there. How do you then respond? And what's your next step?
Right. Absolutely. And
So
so then, that's your mistake response routine.
Okay.
That is actually, once that mistake happens, what's your response, right? Your mistake response.
Mhm.
And I love Kobe Bryant. I've studied him for
Me too.
since I was a kid. But I mean, isn't that Mamba mentality, to where he figured out and went through in his mind every possible scenario. And if this happened, this is how I'm responding. If that happened, then I'm going to do it this way. And then I'm pretty sure, I don't know if it was MJ or Kobe, they're so alike to me, but the defense is always wrong. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's this same concept where I'm constantly thinking about what is going to happen. But sometimes too, the mistakes that young athletes make, and without any fault of their own, because a lot of times this is what is the only thing that's taught. But when we only visualize the positive things. We only visualize hitting the grand slam in the bottom of the ninth. Right. We only visualize hitting the game shot with 1 second to go. We only visualize these things. And then when the mistake actually happens in a game, I remember watching the Mountain West tournament on the women's side last weekend. And so many times where a mistake happens, and maybe it's not even a mistake. I remember there was one time an official called a charge on an athlete, and that one call derailed her entire game completely. Just one call.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're talking about this mistake course. Sometimes these mistakes aren't even really your mistakes.
Right.
Think about an umpire. Think about an official. Hey, they're human too. They're going to make mistakes. So now you're allowing somebody else's mistakes to continue to derail your game. How is that helping you?
No, right. No, that's funny. You said that it wasn't even their mistake, because literally yesterday at practice for my baseball team, it was a strike. It was a very good pitch, and I called it a ball. And nope, it's ball. 3-2 now. You got to make another pitch. And it was crazy because I did it twice. We did it 2 different points during practice. And both times the kid ended up having to throw another 8 to 10 pitches to get out of the inning, which, because they couldn't get past, well, that was a strike. What do you mean? Now what do I do? And that you could see it kind of unravel for them, and they couldn't regain their confidence. They couldn't find the zone, and it wasn't even their mistake. It was a good pitch. It was a good thing. The umpire made a bad call, and it cost them staying in the moment and staying focused, and it went downhill really fast. Yep. And I see it all the time. Obviously, I'm sure you do as well, where an athlete lets the moment that they have no control over affect the next moment.
Absolutely. And you just said it, they unravel.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that you can get into the zone. And now you're focusing on that mistake. He called this a ball, even though it was a strike. So now, oh my gosh, now I have to throw a perfect pitch. Now I'm going to get clobbered because they're just going to be hitting me all game, right? So those are the little things that go through our mind.
And then it snowballs.
And it just happens all the time.
Yeah.
And because we can't let it go. And I think that's a huge distinction. If you were to study any of the greats, pick a sport, pick an athlete who is at the top of that game, their ability to let things go quickly is what separates them from amateurs. That's what makes an elite athlete. There's a lot of other things, but the best of the best know how to let go of mistakes quickly.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But it's they not only let it go, but they use it as fuel. They use it as fire to then, okay, fine. Then I'm going to, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm going to kick your butt even more now.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point, because when you get to those higher levels like that, and you get to the professional level and the people at the very top of those, there's not a whole lot of difference athletically between the top people. So what is it? Why is there one person who, let's go with basketball just because you're familiar with it and the world's pretty familiar with it, LeBron, who's 6'8", 270. What makes him different than the other guy who's 6'10", 240? Yep. Physically, they're very similar, right? So why is LeBron who he is and somebody else a bench player coming off the bench and not excelling to the same extent, because athletically they're probably very similar.
Yep. And I always attribute that to the mental game.
Yeah.
And so the way I see it, what makes an elite athlete or what makes somebody great is, I believe we have 3 gears.
Okay.
And so the first gear is our strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not in shape, it doesn't matter if you're LeBron. Hey, let's just say LeBron and he's now 350.
Right.
Okay, even LeBron being who he is, if he's not in shape, he's not going to be able to hang. He's not going to be able to get up and down the court. And then we all know when we're out of shape, that makes our mind give up so much quicker because our body can't hang, right? So that's the very first thing. We have to be able to be in shape. We have to be able to then compete with our opponents with our strength and relative speed and everything else, right? So that's the first one. The second one is our actual skill. And so again, if I can't pass, catch, or shoot, there's no way, even if I'm the fastest, strongest guy, I'm not going to be able to compete because I need the skill. So if we think of those two, that's what most athletes across the board work on. We're always working on our strength and conditioning, and we're always working on our skill. But the third gear that gets completely ignored, especially in youth athletics, is the mental gear. And those 3 gears work together. And whenever one gear stalls, it also creates the other 2 to get stuck. And so when you're in the zone, when you're in flow, when you're playing your best game, all 3 of those gears are working simultaneously in harmony. And just think back to any point in time in your career and any athlete that you're working with, whenever they're stuck, whenever they're frustrated, whenever they're not able to overcome an obstacle or a challenge in their game, which one of those 3 gears is stuck? It's always one of those 3. And most often, it always comes down to the mental game.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because a lot of the skill development happens in age brackets, right? You're going to get the same skills at this age, same skills at this age. And there might be a person or two who's further ahead on the skill side of things, depending on where you're at. Physically, that definitely is going to be, some people have early growth spurts, some people have late growth spurts, some people lift weights early and whatever else. But the mental stuff is usually the differentiator between the gross population of people who play sports, because there's going to be a time when you're facing somebody who's equal in ability, but they seem to own you because they're more mentally prepared to do that, versus the other way around, where you're sitting there frustrated, yelling at bad calls and wondering why things aren't going your way.
Right.
So,
yep.
Well, awesome. This has been very, very enjoyable. Where can some of the people who are listening to my podcast connect with you, follow along with what you're doing and your journey? If they wanted to reach out and pick your brain, what are some of the things that you want to put out there for the listeners of the podcast?
Yeah, the best place would be my website, mentalitysolutions.com. And that has all of my social media handles on there as well. I would say I'm probably the most active on Twitter, and that's just at Vera Jo Bustos, and Vera Jo J-O. There's no E in Joe, Verajo Bustos. And then I'm also on Instagram as well. I'm on TikTok. I have a YouTube. So all of those handles are on my website, mentalitysolutions.com, as well as my email and my phone number. So yeah, you can find me on my website.
Awesome. I will make sure I put that in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face. But remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and join us again next time as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But no matter what happens, remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review our show. We are all on the edge of greatness.